Is that it?
It's live streaming and we are recording as well.
Okay, thank you, Graham. Well, good morning, everyone. Glad you can all hear and see me. There's no more technical issues. Before we go any further, I just remind those who are sharing an office space that you must adhere to current government guidance on COVID-19 when participating. I can see you are sitting apart, so that's fine. So thank you for doing that. So first of all, welcome to the pre-examination meeting in relation to the appeal by Allen Water Developments Limited against the decision by Collect Manager Council to refuse an application for planning permission in principle for the development of land for houses, school and associated pitches, open space, quay provision, landscaping, roads, paths and other infrastructure at Branshill Road, Sauchie and Collect Manager. My name is Trudy Craggs and I'm a reporter of the Scottish Government's Planning and Environmental Appeals Division. And I've been appointed by Scottish ministers to consider the appeal and to determine whether or not planning permission should be granted. This is a virtual meeting and is being broadcast live, and as such will be stored as part of the DPA website archives and will be capable of repeated viewing. By participating in the virtual meeting, you're consenting to being filmed today. You're also consenting to the use and storage of those images and sound recordings, including any images or information pertaining to you contained in them, for webcasting and training purposes, and for the purpose of keeping historical records and making those records available to the public. If you require any further details on our privacy policy, they can be found on the DPA website. So first of all, thanks to my colleague Callum Henderson for arranging the meeting, and to Graham for carrying out the testing yesterday with the council. And he will stay there in the background and step in if we've got any technical issues this morning, which is also reassuring for me because I'm not that tech savvy, which is good to be there. I know those who aren't in the same office may need to liaise with each other during the meeting. If you can either keep your devices so they're not audible or keep yourselves on mute while you're doing that, that'd be helpful so we don't get interference or noise in the background. And when you're not speaking, if you can keep yourself on mute, because sometimes there can be a little bit of interference, but it doesn't seem like that today. If there is, I'll let you know. And if you are going to speak, remind to unmute. Seems to be a pandemic favourite, isn't it? I'll mute. So let's hope we don't fall into that trap this morning. So first of all, can I ask the lead participant for the appellant to introduce yourself and those attending for the appellant this morning?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Andrew Marshall from Geddes Consulting, speaking on behalf of the appellant. I have Bob Salter with me from Geddes Consulting, and we also have Nicola Hill from Allen Water Developments joining us.
Good morning.
Morning.
Thank you. Nice to meet you all. And can the lead participant for the council introduce yourself and those attending on behalf of the council?
Hi, I'm Grant Baxter, Principal Planner in Collect Manager Council and Case Officer for the application, and I'm joined today by my team leader in Planning Building Standards, Alan Finlayson, and also by our solicitor, Lee Robertson.
Morning all.
Morning. Morning, great, nice to meet you all too. So if you move on to item 2 of the agenda, we've just done the opening remarks and introduction. Just to kind of reiterate the purpose of the meeting this morning, and that is to discuss the procedural arrangements for the examination process as I set out in the agenda, which was circulated last week. As I said in that agenda, there will be no discussion on the merits or otherwise of the case, and I will not hear any evidence today. I will be keeping a note of our discussions, and the case officer will circulate to all of you attending the meeting today a note of the key decisions and the procedural arrangements in the form of our procedure notice, and that will come out next week. Item 3 is about the proceedings. Now, this appeal will be progressed in accordance with the Town and Country Planning Appeal Scotland Regulations 2013. The written material already submitted will be taken into account in my consideration of the appeal. However, as I've intimated, I consider I need additional evidence on some issues in order to determine the appeal. So that takes us on to item 4, which is planning for a virtual hearing. So to get the information I need, primarily on education contributions, I indicated I thought the best way and the most efficient way to do that would be through a hearing session. Now, I did think about doing written submissions, but I was concerned that when I got the written submissions in, I'd have more questions and that would almost prolong the evidence, whereas I thought hearing might be quite efficient, so I could actually discuss the issues with follow-up questions with the parties, which is why I've opted for a hearing session for the education infrastructure aspects. It's still anticipated that on the 9th of August, all physical distancing requirements will be lifted, but this is conditional on those over 40 being fully vaccinated and a review of the relevant data and the numbers and figures at that time. The lifting of restrictions or otherwise, as you know, will be confirmed by the First Minister next week. In line with current DPA guidance, any lifting of physical distancing restrictions will signal a gradual resumption of in-person events. But until then, such events will continue to be held virtually, and we reporters are instructed in the meantime to plan for virtual proceedings. Now, the intention is that a virtual hearing would be broadcast live, like we're doing today, and that would enable interested parties or people in your organisations to watch the proceedings either live or later. And if necessary, we carry out further testing if we require to do that ahead of the hearing. If restrictions are lifted, the DPA will move gradually back to in-person procedure where that is appropriate. Now, virtual procedure already planned, this would fall into that category, will be converted if it is appropriate to do so, and only where that can be done easily and without any delay to the process. So just as a starting point, although the assumption we're going to work to this morning is that we are proceeding by a virtual hearing, I would welcome parties' views as to whether you feel it would be appropriate to look to converting this hearing session into an in-person session, subject to those caveats I've just mentioned. So if I start with the appellant, it's just to get views at this stage as to whether you'd be content to continue virtually, or if you'd like to explore the possibility of moving to in-person should restrictions be lifted. So, Mr. Marshall, I'll come to you for the appellant.
I don't think we particularly have a preference. We intend on all being in one room for the virtual hearing session, so it would be fairly easy for us to proceed on that basis. However, if everyone was comfortable doing it in person, we would be happy to proceed on that basis.
And for the council, Mr. Baxter.
I think a similar answer. I mean, we're likely to be remote from each other, and also there are education representatives who would be attending the hearing as well, who aren't here today, who are likely to be remote also. So I think if the restrictions allow, we wouldn't have a difficulty in having a physical hearing.
Okay, that's really helpful. For us to make suitable investigations, does the council know of any suitable venues, bearing in mind it would have to be big enough to accommodate any necessary public health measures or physical distancing measures that still are in place at that point? I don't know if there's a venue that we could maybe contact once we know that the restrictions have been lifted.
Lee, do you have any update on the current restrictions on our council chamber in terms of numbers and how that might change come 9th of August?
My understanding is that Kilncraigs is still closed, and it will be closed probably even when restrictions are lifted. There'll be a phased return, so you're looking more September, October realistically for the building to potentially open up. I think I can think of a couple of venues, but I would need to know well in advance because of the way the booking system works within the council. So with it being, I suppose, all I can say is I will check on the 9th of August. If it's a case of things are relaxed, then that will be my first thing I'll do then, and check to see if there is a venue available, and then that'll influence the decision, I think.
What we normally try to do is go to a public venue, so it doesn't need to be council property at all. It could just be a hall somewhere, and the DPA would make contact and arrangements. So it's whether is there a big village hall or community hall.
I do. There's a couple. I mean, things like the town hall is another one I was thinking about, but we've got to be careful there because that is also being used as a testing centre, and also sometimes there's a area to the rear as well as being used for vax. Do you know what I mean? Chambers is top of the head, probably the easiest one I can think of for us, but the acoustics in that particular area ain't the best. We struggle ourselves with our council meetings, so but it is usable, and it's a big enough space that it would accommodate all of us. But I would need to check and make sure that there was no council meetings on except for that day. So I think what I would like to do is just wait and see what the position is. I can think of a number of venues, put it that way, that we could potentially use. But I think let's wait and see what the night says, and if that's the case, then I can get back in touch with you and confirm either through yourself or Graham what the chat is in terms of a venue.
Okay, thank you. The appellant, do you have any views on venues? Anything you're aware of that would be usable?
No particular venues come to mind, to be honest.
Okay, well, we can almost cross that bridge when we come to it, if we need to come to it. We'll find out what happens next week. Our guidance will be reviewed once we hear from the First Minister next week, and then the case officer would probably get in touch to see if we can find a venue and ensure that wouldn't impinge any of the timeline that we set today. So we'll touch on that for the next couple of weeks with the case officer, and we would confirm the arrangements probably by the end of August, just so everyone knows what we're doing come September, October time. Okay, moving on to item 5. Now, I set out in the agenda my provisional assessment of the issues that I felt I'd want discussed at a hearing session. And it was really, the first thing is to get parties' views on my assessment, whether you're in general agreement with that, whether you think there's any matters that I have missed that you think should be dealt with in a hearing session. So I'll start again with the appellant, Mr. Marshall.
No, we were happy with the proposed agenda for the hearing session. I think it covers the range of issues in terms of education.
Mr. Baxter?
Yeah, the items in agenda point 5 seem comprehensive to us in terms of covering the key issues around the appeal. Maybe could invite Alan and or Lee to add to that if they've got anything that they want to say specifically, but it did appear to be, as I say, comprehensive.
Yeah, no. If I could just interject there, Trudy, no comments from myself. As I say, I agree it's comprehensive, and clearly there will be ongoing discussions with the council's education representatives over time. But to me, there's nothing there that jumps out from the assessment of the application or any other council matters.
I'm of the same view.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful. So we've got our starting point. I will be issuing a procedure notice probably just think of time right at the end of this week or early next week on a number of other matters. Just to give you a heads up, it will touch on things like the number of houses that are being proposed, the affordable housing proposals, requesting draft conditions and draft heads terms for Section 5 agreement. It might be a couple more matters, but that's the general broad outline of the written submissions. I haven't put it out so far because I actually wanted to discuss the timing of that with you before I put it out to make sure that, given the holiday period and everything else, there was sufficient time for parties to respond and dovetail it in with the timeline for the hearing process. Now, what I was intending to do was give the council 28 days to respond. So that would probably take me to the end of August. And then I'd also give the appellant 28 days from the receipt of the council's response to comment on the response from the council. That would take you through to the end of September if the council took their 28 days. Now, we'll run in parallel with the submissions for the hearing process, but given that it's not touching at all on education issues, I was hoping that from the council's perspective that would be manageable, because hopefully it's a different, apart from you probably, Mr. Baxter, it's different parties that may be inputting into that. So really just get a feel as to whether that timeline feels acceptable. I'll start, Mr. Baxter, with you.
Yeah, I think for the non-educational issues, that seems reasonable. As you maybe know, our main education contact is still on the sort of school holiday or school term time sort of basis, so we wouldn't be sort of back with us until later on next month. But for those other issues to do with things like house numbers, affordable housing, planning conditions, etc., I don't think we've got any difficulty with the proposed time frame.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Marshall, for the appellant, are you happy with having 28 days?
Yes, we're happy to proceed on that basis. Thanks.
Okay, so that'll come out from the case officer next week, or end of this week, beginning of next week. Okay, so turning to item 6, and this is on the prior disclosure of cases. As you know, if you've been involved in the appeal process before, there's a number of written exchanges that would need to take place before the hearing session, and that's just to make sure that everyone is fully aware of the case that's been made by the other party and that there's no surprises either for you or for me when we get to the hearing session. So the first thing I'm going to draw your attention to is that in terms of the appeal regulations, you have 14 days from the date on which the note of this meeting is issued to confirm that you're going to take part in the hearing session. Now, I am assuming that both parties are going to take part, otherwise you wouldn't be here today, but it is a formality of the hearing regs. So it'll be in bold in the note of the meeting, but just to remind you to do that, to make sure we comply with that part of the regulations. In the agenda, Annex A, I put a provisional timeline for submissions. And this assumed that the hearing would take place, as already discussed and agreed, on the 27th of October. And I'm assuming that date is still acceptable to both parties. So a few nods would be yeah, that's still acceptable to both parties. One thing I did wonder though when I was looking at the agenda and going through issues was whether parties think that one day is sufficient. Now, that may depend on the extent to which any agreement can be reached between the parties on matters prior to the hearing, in, for example, a statement of agreed matters, and the extent of the evidence that might be submitted by the council to support their position. I already have quite a lot of evidence from the appellant. They've got new education impact statements, things like that. Their appeal statements have quite a lot of evidence that's from the appellant. It would depend how much evidence came from the council as to whether we thought one day was sufficient. And it would also depend on how far we get to the agreement once the rebuttals came in after the hearing statements. But really to get a feel for parties to whether they think, given the items that I've identified, one day would be sufficient, or whether we should prudently set aside 2 days, being the 27th and 28th. So I'll ask Mr. Marshall first for the appellant.
I think we'd be fairly comfortable that one day would be sufficient. The appellant would be quite keen to have a statement of agreed matters with the council, and I think we could cover off hopefully some of those items in terms of the key policy requirements that we could kind of rattle through fairly quickly on the day.
Okay, that was my thought. I thought maybe education plan policy and guidance could hopefully be dealt with fairly rapidly through a statement of agreed matters, and maybe touching on any minor points at the hearing session to move on to more substantive things. But Mr. Baxter, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I think one day is reasonable, provided we can sort of keep to a fairly sort of strict time frame on that day. I maybe did have some concerns that we could sort of drift slightly, and that maybe an extra half a day might be required. As I say, we have participants from education and estate services coming in, and there's potential for quite a lot of detailed discussion around some of the points in agenda item 5. Yeah, I mean, I think I would share Andrew's view that agreeing issues around relevant policy and guidance is fine, but there's quite a lot in there, in terms of issues around the scope to extend Craigbank Primary School, for example, or a new school campus issue. I think there's maybe potential for quite sort of detailed discussions there, which I think feasibly could go beyond one day if we're not sort of careful if we want to sort of really interrogate all those issues in detail. So I don't know whether you feel as a reporter maybe having a half day sort of set aside, an additional half day set aside may be something we want to think about.
Can I just interject? I think it'd be prudent to keep the 2 days because there is quite a lot of stuff for us to get through, particularly with regards to the education strategy stuff. As you say, Grant, there is a few bodies that probably will be attending. So I just want to make sure that, we do have that time set aside, and if we don't need it, we don't need it. But at least, we've got that day reserved for the 2.
I personally would rather have a day set aside that we need rather than having to try and fit it in later on, which becomes more of an issue time.
Agreed.
Get to the point where I can determine the appeal. I would say, to give you a bit of comfort, that when I tend to do hearing sessions, what I do in the agenda is I set specific questions. I don't ask everyone just to come and discuss because we can discuss things around the houses for a long time. I make it fairly specific and focused on the points that I need to know. Because it's the information I need so I can actually determine the appeal. So the agenda would be I mean, I would allow discussion, obviously, but it would be a series of questions, maybe different parts to a question, but I don't want to focus in on, so that I would hope the discussion would remain focused on those points rather than kind of drift around. But I do agree there is quite a lot in there, and I thought that when I looked at the issues that may need to be explored, and I think I'd rather have the 2 days, and if we get to the end of the 27th and we're finished, then great. We don't need to use the extra date. Is everyone free on the next day, the 28th? If we allocated both those days?
Yes, I am on the that side, so it's not a problem.
It's no problem for us as well.
And,
The council, yeah.
I'm fine.
Fine for me, thanks.
well, what we'll do is we'll set aside both those days. There's nothing worse than getting 2/3 of the way through a hearing session and trying then to get everyone's diaries out to fix another day, which might not come up until October, November,
Yes.
December, and it's just not worth getting into that situation. I'd rather have the appeal issued by then, to be honest, than we doing another hearing session. Okay, so we'll set aside those 2 days. So that's really helpful and really good. Okay, so moving to Annex A and what we need before those dates in October. First of all, what I need will be a hearing statement, also to address the points in the agenda that we've identified. This must provide full details of the case that will be put forward by a party, list the documents that will be referred to, and specify the witnesses that will take part and what they will cover. And I was working back from the 27th of October, and I wanted to also give parties sufficient time. And I was aware that obviously the council's education witness probably wasn't back until later in August. So I was proposing that hearing statements be submitted on the 8th of September. And first of all, I'll ask the council for your view on that, if that's doable from your perspective. I want to make sure we have sufficient time so I do get the best evidence and the hearing statements are full, otherwise the rebuttals become a bit pointless if the hearing statements don't have enough information in them. So is the 8th of September sufficient time for the council to prepare the hearing statement? The documents would also be submitted on that day as well.
I think that might be a bit tight, Grant.
Yeah, I was slightly concerned about that, Lee. Yeah, just in terms of sort of being let's see who's our sort of main education witness coming back on, I think the week of the 16th of August. I think that's when he's back. So there isn't much time from him coming back to us picking up with him and his colleagues on, you know, preparing the statement and all the documents. That maybe a wee bit concerned that's quite tight potentially.
I think if I could just add, Grant, just to add to Grant and Lee's comments, that, you know, of course, when our education colleagues return, there, as has already been referred to today in respect of changing guidance, I think it's likely that that's likely to be a period of flux for colleagues in respect of their other obligations in terms of education obligations. So I agree, it's possibly a bit tight.
Would an extra week to the 15th help? I'm just concerned I don't want to push it too much. You don't have much time to do the rebuttals.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to make sure there's enough time built into that, and also enough time before the hearing to do the agenda so that that's detailed and focused enough for the hearing session.
Yeah.
So we could push it to the 15th or the start of next week, so the 20th.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we certainly appreciate it can't just be extended indefinitely, as you say, given the rebuttal periods, and we don't want to shift the date of the hearing, of course. Mm-hmm. So certainly, if you felt up to the 20th was still achievable, that'd be a welcome additional period of time.
Yeah, I think the 20th is probably gives us that wee bit more comfort. I think trying to achieve what we're trying to achieve, and I think as Alan said, particularly our education colleagues, and depending what happens on the 9th, and you know, it could be one way or another that they're going to have to, you know, in terms of their other obligations and how they're going to have to deal with the provision of education. So yeah, I think the 20th is probably, that gives us a wee bit extra time. That would be great.
And just for coming to the appellant to get your views on this, if it was 20th for the hearing statements, then I'd be looking for rebuttals. I would give you until the 11th of October. which is giving you 3 weeks to rebuttals. Agenda would come out, I said the 15th. I would try and get it out still on the 15th, so you've got sufficient time to prepare for the hearing sessions. Mr. Baxter, how does that sound from a rebuttal perspective?
That's fine for us. I thought maybe you were asking Andrew Marshall.
Sorry, I was going to just ask you
yes.
first. I'll go to Mr. Marshall just now. Mr. Marshall, from your perspective, are those dates workable?
The rebuttal period was our main concern, and I was going to suggest the 11th because I think 3 weeks minimum would be what we're looking for. So if that's agreeable, we'd be happy to proceed on that basis.
Okay, yeah, it's key that parties have time to prepare. Otherwise, it does make the hearing session a bit pointless if we're not all putting forward the best evidence that we can. So if we go for the 20th of September for hearing statements and documents, the 11th of October for rebuttals, and I'll try and keep the 15th of October, although maybe the 18th. I'll rethink about that for the agenda, because again, I want to make sure the agenda is detailed and focused enough so you can all prepare to come to the hearing, because that makes the hearing session more efficient too. And I'll confirm that in the note of the meeting. Okay. We have touched on submitting a statement of agreed matters, possibly in relation to planning, education policy and guidance, which I think would be helpful and would allow us to narrow down the issues. As you're going through your hearing statements, there may be other areas of agreement. I wonder if it would be helpful for the statement of agreed matters to be worked on and to be submitted with the rebuttals, which should give you time to have a look at the other parties' hearing statements, think about where you're going in terms of your rebuttals for the areas in dispute, and be able to agree any areas that you can agree. So that when I get the rebuttals, I've also got the statement of agreed matters, and that really makes it quite obvious what's in dispute and what has agreed. The other alternative is you put the statement of agreed matters in at the point you put your hearing statement in, but I worry it might be a bit early in the process, given that a lot of the stuff might come through the rebuttals once you've seen a lot of the council's evidence. So Mr. Marshall, do you have a view from the appellant's perspective?
We would tend to agree. I think what we could do is the appellant's happy to take the lead in drafting that, and we could potentially have a provisional statement of agreed matters with the council before the rebuttals, which is then updated at a later date. So we can have a provisional draft around the time of the hearing statements and then seek to finalise that with the rebuttals.
Okay, that sounds helpful. Mr. Baxter, that's something you could work with the appellant on?
Yeah, that sounds like a reasonable way forward. Happy with that.
Okay, so what I'll maybe put in time on then is if even if I could see a draft of that statement of agreed matters, it's not binding in any way, but it would give you an indication of where things are moving when you're submitting the hearing statements, with the final one coming in when you're submitting the rebuttals. That would be really helpful, and if the appellant could take the lead in that, I think that would be a good way forward. As for closing submissions, now we don't normally or don't always have to do closing submissions when we do hearing session, unlike in the inquiry session, which we always do closing submissions. But I think there's quite a lot in this hearing session that I think it would be useful for parties to submit a closing submission in writing after the hearing session, just to kind of wrap up your case and put out the key points you want me to take away from the hearing session, and to give me a final position on your views on the planning obligation. I propose that the council would submit their closing submission, and I don't want the whole case behind the application rehearsed. I just want it focused on what we discussed at the hearing session. I want it quite focused on that, not a general closing submission to support the whole application, but really focus on the education contributions. I was going to ask the council to submit their by the 5th of November, which gives you just over a week. with the appellant a week later. But again, I'll ask the council if that gives you sufficient time to do that on the basis I'm not looking for a war and peace. I'm just looking for something that pulls your case together and draws out the key points that you want me to take away from the hearing session in support of your position on the planning obligation. So do you think the 5th of November is achievable?
Yeah, we certainly wouldn't want to give you war and peace and completely understand the purpose of the closing submission. But if you think that could possibly be a 14-day period to submit that, that would be, I think, probably, well, that would be more acceptable to us, just in terms of the few parties would have to pull that together in quite a short period of time. I think a week might be a bit tight.
If we had the 12th of November, Mr. Marshall, from the appellant's perspective, could you still do yours a week later on the 19th, or do you think you require a longer period of time? That would give you kind of 3 weeks from the date of the hearing and a week after the council submitted their closing submission to pick up any issues you want to.
On the basis that the council submission was available on the 12th, we wouldn't have any problem with the 19th.
Okay, that's great, thank you. Okay, I think that deals with everything we need to under item 6, unless anyone's got any queries. On item 7 then, documents. Now, as you'll all be aware, any document that's submitted, your hearing statements, rebuttals, and just documents you're relying on should be shared electronically with other party and copied to the case officer. What we tend to do for virtual, and it might still be helpful here in case we do end up still doing a virtual hearing, is we've just had a single document list. So we're not switching between document lists all the time, and the documents are split into maybe core documents, or as the appellant's done in their document list so far, your policy documents, plan documents, submissions on the appellant, the council's documents. But it helps it's all in one document list. So it would be helpful if we could do that in this case, because it saves, if you've done a virtual hearing, you don't want to be too much chopping around because you've got a limited number of screens to be looking at things. So if the appellant could take the lead on that and help produce a single document list with the council feeding in, I think that would be really helpful. And what we've also found helpful is that all the documents and statements are put on a memory stick for the parties. Again, we find that if it's a virtual hearing, the last thing you want to be doing is downloading documents while you're in the hearing session, because everything slows down, obviously, because we're using so much broadband with actually broadcasting of the event. Would the appellant be happy to provide memory sticks? Normally that's for to come to parties within 1 week after the date that documents are submitted. Anything that comes after that, I would expect the parties to be downloading into their own system in preparation for the hearing session. But if the bulk of the hearing statements and documents are on a memory stick, it just helps with everyone's prep and on the day of the hearing if we have to go virtual.
Yeah, we're happy to take the lead on that.
Okay, well, that's really good of you. And the case officer will be in touch with the council to get addresses for where you want the memory stick sent, on the assumption you might not be in the office at that point, or you may be, who knows. And it would be 1 week after the submission date for the documents and the hearing statements. And just a reminder that during the period of restrictions, the council is not required to place the relevant deal on deposit. But obviously, all the documents and statements are published on our website, so that's where parties can access them. Okay, item 8, the site inspection. I have already done an unaccompanied site inspection of the site and the surrounding areas and the schools. I had a good walk around. It was a beautiful sunny day, which was very nice. So I have done all that. Are the parties content with that, or is there anything else you'd want me to go and look at? Now, it's maybe one of those things we can pick up at the end of the hearing session. If anything comes out with there that you think you'd want me to go around and look at, but I wouldn't intend doing anything between now and the hearing session, because I did go out and spend a whole morning wandering around. So if you're content with that at present, we can touch on that again at the end of the hearing session if parties think there's anything else. Mr. Marshall, are you happy with that from the appellant's perspective, or is there anything else you can think of now that you think I should go and look at?
Just to make you aware, we're currently in discussions with the council about arranging a site visit to Craigbank Primary School, the existing primary school, and there may be value in yourself having a look at the existing school prior to the hearing session. However, that could potentially still be undertaken following the hearing session if the timescales didn't work out.
Would that be to go into the school?
We are planning to hopefully arrange access to the site and in the school.
Just to let the reporter know, we did a school visit for a hearing session last year, and some of the pupils were in. It was a Friday PM,
Right.
so and the reporter was there, and it was well received, and it was the head teacher conducted the tour.
No, I think it would be useful. I mean, I've been to the school, but just outside the school, and also I was mindful that I wasn't in the school grounds, obviously for safety reasons and things like that. So a visit to the school, see the configuration and things inside would probably be helpful. Clearly, it would need to be accompanied with all parties there. But if that is something that could be arranged, might be helpful before the hearing session, but it wouldn't go wrong after the hearing session either. And if all parties are agreeable to that, then that's something I think probably would be beneficial.
Can I just get some clarity as to who in the council you're speaking to in relation to accessing this school?
It was the head teacher.
I think we need to go through I think we need to go through the chief education officer in relation to that, not the head teacher.
Sorry, Lee, we didn't arrange it. It was the council that arranged it. I thought they arranged it via the head teacher. So if there's a protocol to follow,
yeah, sure.
That must be followed.
Just to clarify, it was Alan Finlayson who picked up the email and it's forwarded to the relevant colleagues within the council, and we're currently waiting clarification and confirmation on a date.
Okay, fine, that's fine. I'll take it up with Alan then. We can discuss it. It's just I just want to make sure that because we've got the chief education officer is aware of it. That's all, and just it's just protocol, really. You know.
Absolutely. Just to clarify, it's gone through. It's gone through Michael Lee, so that was where the inquiry was forwarded to. So. You know, whether like Michael raises it with Lorraine, but I'll pick that up with Michael. But yeah, I absolutely agree that we need to go through the right protocols.
Perfect, thanks, Alan. That's great. Cheers.
Okay, it would be helpful if anyone could give the case officer a note of likely dates. That would be helpful. Just because I've got a few other cases happening over the next 2-3 months, and also I'd like to make sure I was available to go if we're doing it. So that would be helpful. If someone could just give as much notice as possible or arrange of dates just to make sure I can attend. That would be good. Okay, item 9 is the DPA contact. As you'll all be aware, any queries that you have about the hearing session or the procedural arrangements or the submission of documents, anything like that, should be directed to the case officer, and that's Chris Kennedy. I think you've all been in touch with him anyway. I'll put his contact details in the note with me now, just so they're easy to find. And that moves us swiftly on to item 10 and any other business. So I'll start with the appellant. Is there anything else you want to raise today or any queries you've got what we discussed?
Nothing further, thanks.
And Mr. Baxter for the council?
Nothing from me specifically. I would just again ask Lee or Alan if they had anything they wanted to add.
I've got nothing further to add, thanks.
Nothing from me, thanks.
Okay. Great, well that's a very short and sweet pre-examination meeting, which is always good. So thank you for actually taking part. I don't know if you're used to doing these kind of things, but we're certainly getting used to doing virtual meetings like this, and they tend to be very quick and very efficient actually for everyone's time. So thank you for taking part and for coming on today. The note of the meeting will come out next week. The timetable is out the 4th of August, and it will be issued by or on the 4th of August. And that will set out the dates that we discussed today. And the note will also be published on our website. As I said, the procedure notice for the written submissions will also come out, I think most likely start next week, but it may be the end of this week. So look out for that too, and we'll go with the dates that we discussed on that. But any queries you've got, please get in touch with Chris. and always would say you can now leave. And obviously, safe trip home, but some of you are in your homes, so you can all just click the button and take care. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks all. Bye.
Very much.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.